Hello, welcome to Clause 9.3 Management Review, and this video looks at ISO 9001 and 27001. It can also be considered for the remainder of the ISO management system standards because broadly the structure of Clause 9.3 applies to them all and will be structured and framed the same way. So I think if we look at it in the parts, much like we've experienced before, and when we come to ISO 27001, where 9001 is broken into three subclauses, 9.3 in 27001 deals with the same scope of criteria, but in one single clause. So let's look at it clause by clause here. 9.3.1, top management shall review the organization's quality management system at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, effectiveness, and alignment with the strategic direction of the organization. Okay, so it's pitched straight away at a very high level, and it's making sure that, it involves people who practice management at the highest level. Top management shall review the management system. So Enable ISO customers will be using the total management system and the TMS registers at planned intervals. We work with organizations of varying sizes, widely varying complexity, largely in the tech sector. But if they're not directly in the tech sector, they will have an element of technology that applies to them, like they might be managing an e-commerce platform or an IT application in some way. I think, the planned intervals thing, because of the complexity of those companies we work with, we recommend quarterly for management reviews. With some companies, we work with them with monthly management reviews, but certainly an auditor would expect that the frequency of management review is adequate and proportionate and so on to be applicable and suitable for the organization that they're auditing. So, looking at the remainder of the criteria in clause 9.3.1, what are you looking to do when you're reviewing through these planned intervals? To ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, effectiveness, and alignment. With what? With the strategic direction of the organization, which includes using ISO standards to provide a framework for managing elements of the business. So I think the general application of that is quite extensive and broad, but the significant point there really is it's the participation and involvement of top management in this management review. So in 9.3.2, once we've accepted that we are going to carry out a management review at a planned interval, what are we going to consider? So Enable ISO customers will be aware that we have created the management review form we've introduced, which contains a fixed agenda drawn directly from this clause of the standard. So, that allows us to document the management review to make sure that the action points and the discussions themselves have been captured in some way. Let's look at the criteria. The management review shall be planned and carried out taking into consideration A, the status of actions from previous management reviews, B, changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the quality management system. Well, this is where you look back to clause 4.1 and 4.2 and those issues that you would have documented on your contextual issues register or equivalent. So that could be through a general risk register as well. C, information on performance and effectiveness of the quality management system, including trends in 1, customer satisfaction and feedback from relevant interested parties. In preceding videos, we've looked at the whole area of customer satisfaction and in particular the Net Promoter Score methodology. 2, the extent to which quality objectives have been met. Back to clause 6.2 for quality objectives, but how have you planned those objectives into your operations and across your organization so that performance can then be reported according to those stated objectives. looking at 4 non-conformities and corrective actions. So the TMS that we introduce uses a CAR register, CAR, corrective action request register. However, a lot of operational systems, in other words, computer controlled manufacturing operations and so on, reporting dashboards and IT systems, people who are using the likes of Jira or Asana, Google Task Management, ConnectWise, all of these things where the systems where you manage contextual issues, various risks and non-conformities as they happen throughout operations. How the management review must look at the performance in relation to closing out and the methodologies for documenting them to make sure they're suitable. Monitoring and measurement requirements. Well, the results of monitoring measurement need to be considered at management review, simply to be sure that those monitoring and measuring methodologies are working for the organization, but also it gives the opportunity to look at deviations away from those to check to see if there's anything that needs to be done. Audit results, particularly with those organizations we're speaking to now who are working towards ISO certification, particularly for the first time, it's important to understand that without a management review documented, which considers the results of your internal audit functions, the auditor can't proceed, because that's a fundamental requirement of ISO management systems auditing. Point 7, the performance of external providers. Yes, it's captured there in 5 very straightforward English words. The performance of external providers. It's quite a significant aspect of ISO auditing, because, referring back to earlier clauses of for what you've got to communicate with external providers, and then how you're going to monitor and evaluate performance throughout clause 8 for externally provided products and services. And then now we're into management review, where we're looking at the performance of external providers. So we're referring to things like the internal audit function we spoke about before, and that looks like external provider and evaluations. It looks at them from a perspective of how often do you need to look at particular suppliers because of the nature of the relationship and the inherent risks in that relationship. The adequacy of resources at point D. The word adequacy is there for a reason, and an auditor will focus in on that word and how that applies, because each organization will have its own requirements with regard to adequacy of resourcing. So I guess the internal audit function and the management review has to look at the adequacy of resourcing the management system and its objectives and functions to make sure that they all achieve their intended outcomes. Point E, the effectiveness of actions to take to address risks and opportunities, or to address risk, in relation to mitigations, and what mitigations have we put in place, what training have we provided, all of those things that we put in place to protect the business. Well, what we're looking for at this point in the management review is who's responsible for all of those controls and so on, and how is reporting being delivered into management review. Every organization is going to be different, so if you need some help, please give us a call on that one. And then opportunities for improvement. So Enable ISO customers will be aware of how we document these opportunities on the objectives register. Those opportunities can come about from management direction or external pressures, or indeed, as a result of auditing, somebody finds a potential for improvement as a result of an analysis of an activity maybe, and there's a suggested improvement that the company or the organization adopts, documents on the objectives register, and now we're looking to, review performance in relation to those opportunities for improvement. I guess, obviously, you've got to understand that it's one thing to have a management review form or an agenda, but what the auditor is looking for is documented evidence to support all of this. So a form is usually the correct way to go about it. However, organizations with looser formality, if you like, so long as you can show that, there's been that moment where management has come together to review things, and that all of the various data that's on the register, if you can kind of annotate notes on those registers rather than having a minuting document, you could put your notes alongside all of the issues on the contextual issues register and so on, and to update and annotate as you go. And that way you can show an auditor that relevant to each issue, you can show when it is being evaluated through that management review function. There are many different ways to satisfy the criteria. It doesn't necessarily have to be a form, but it usually is the best way to go about it. Okay, so let's look at the expectations of an auditor with regard to management review outputs. So looking at clause 933, management review outputs, this kind of will include, further actions to address previously determined non-conformities and so on, where they're still open and appropriate. So the outputs of the management review shall include decisions and actions related to A, opportunities for improvement, B, the need for changes to the quality management system, C, resource needs. It's very concise and straightforward. Opportunities for improvement, well, that's a straightforward thing, but what I would encourage you to do is use the management review form and document that improvement, who's responsible for it and so on. I think that information can then be extracted out of the management review document and used as input into the objectives register within the TMS system. Any need for changes to the quality management system. So a need for a change could be either corrective or an objective for improvement. So likewise, those improvements would be documented on the objectives register, and a corrective action will be documented on the CAR register. Resource requirements. Well, you would look at the resourcing register and review it in relation to determinations at management review and adjust accordingly. So then there would be action points that would come out of that, and however they're managed within your own organization. There could be instruction to proceed in various different angles, but the corrective action register, CAR register, can be used for this purpose. But likewise, you could have a task management tool that you're using. So the final piece of criteria then is the organization shall retain documented information as evidence of the results of management reviews. That's the very purpose of the management review form. But like I did mention earlier in the video clip, you could be using other software applications which can satisfactorily amount to the information. I think the feeling here is that given the feedback we have from our clients, their auditors appear to like the form that we present for audit. So if you're not going to use our form, come up with some kind of a mechanism where you're able to demonstrate that you're using clause 932 from this standard as your fixed agenda for that meeting. Okay, I think finally what we really want to do is have a look at how this compares to ISO 27001, and we look at that very highly and briefly. So as I mentioned earlier, clause 9.3 of ISO 9001 is in 3 subclauses, and here in ISO 27001 it's in a single clause. But broadly, it covers exactly the same set of criteria, but just phrases it differently, probably a little bit more concisely. There isn't really any major change to look at here, and the only thing is you supplant the words information security for quality when it refers to a management system, but the planned infill requirement is there, and the overall criteria for continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. It doesn't say to the organization's strategic direction in this instance, but it cuts it short there, and it's more direct towards information security. So the criteria is the same. There is no real mention of any thing outside of what we've already covered for ISO 9001. So I think really and truly the real thing here is just at point E, where it's in 9001, it's the actions to address risks and opportunities. Here it's risk assessment and the status of risk treatment plan. So, you know, if there's ongoing risk treatment kind of where mitigations are being implemented, or if there are incident management plans, for example, that need periodic, the equivalent of a fire drill, or testing failovers, we want, where appropriate, the good level of reporting into top management to satisfy the audit requirements in that regard. So really, the management review output, the form, the minuting document, if you like, should contain references to these things and be very specific about those, you know, making sure that you document these considerations, particularly where there's ongoing work that's easily observable by any visiting auditor when they arrive. Okay, I think really the intent of the standards should be reasonably clear, and where people might need a little bit of help is how to apply it to their specific unique set of circumstances in your own organizations. So please get in touch with us. Any questions through the chat box, and if you're looking for don't forget, you know, that if you're looking for that little bit of extra guidance or that one-off query that you need to have answered, don't forget you can get us through the chat box at any time. Take care.